1 minute and we'll start.
Okay. I'm flipping through and seeing people's pictures on here. It's good to see your faces.
You may recognize some names in there. You never know.
I do. I do recognize some names and faces. Yes. It's always good to be among friends.
Jennifer, I was going to tell you, I'm Miss Hawkins. I teach kinder at Ward.
Yes. Yes. It's good to see you.
Got married.
I'm glad that you're on here. That is fantastic.
The glasses and the hat. She tried to camouflage, but
yes.
She just trained this summer.
Yes, I just got my first case.
Good.
Okay, well, I'm going to start. I've started recording, so. All right. Oh, all righty. Okay, guys, so welcome to our CASA Lunch and Learn, and we are really excited about today. I'm not sure how many of you, I would have to go back and look to see how many of you got to do the play therapy session with Rebecca Hott, but we are so excited to have Jennifer Smothermon joining us today, and she's going to take what we've already got, that little foundation, and she's going to build on that. And I'm going to share at some point how this has become very real to me on my current case. And so that's what made me realize we really need to go deeper with the different types of psychotherapies that are available for our kids and how they're going to be able to help them. So I'm going to do a couple of housekeeping things real quick. As always, we'll do door prizes at the end. So if you can stay on to the very end. Throughout her presentation, I'll be monitoring the chat box. So if you have questions, put them in that chat box so that you don't forget. And then Jennifer's going to go through those and answer all of your questions at the end. I emailed out the PowerPoint to everybody, and I also sent it in a PDF form so that you have it to reference, because there's some great information in there and you want to save that email. So I also want to take a quick moment before we get started. Well, first, let me say we don't have a Zoom training for the next 2 weeks, but in 2 weeks on August the 5th, we are going to have someone from Child Advocacy Center that's going to be talking to us about what they do. So they do the forensic interviews with the children that have been abused and neglected, and they're going to talk to us about that process, what those relationships look like, how we can partner with them, how we can best serve our kids. So you'll want to make sure that you get to watch that one for sure. And so put that on your calendar. And as always, I'll be sending out the Zoom invite to you guys. And so as we get started, we are really excited that you guys know we've been in the process for the last few months of searching and hiring our new executive director. And we are so blessed to say that today our new executive director begins her journey with CASA. She comes with a ton of experience, and we're actually going to host a little meet and greet virtually. And we'll get that scheduled and we'll get that sent out to you, where you're going to have time to actually engage with her and get to visit with her, ask questions, and get to know her heart. But I wanted to take a minute to introduce you to Leanne Millander, who comes to us from Texas CASA, but she's also a former CPS case caseworker, and she was also an ED at another program for 18 years. So this is Leanne. I'm gonna let her visit with you a second. You want to sit down?
Oh, no, because we gotta be distant and you know, all that good stuff. So hello. Thank you for letting me come on and be part of this incredible team. The past 4 years, I was a QA specialist with Texas CASA. They
Tell them QA.
QA.
Y'all know
okay.
we complain about that.
Yeah,
right?
so please don't think of me as that QA lady. Not, okay? I wanted to come back into the trenches with you all, because kids are my heart. They're my passion. I'm starting to tear up, so I'm going to break off. I love them. I love the incredible things that volunteers do. Our mission. You have a phenomenal program. I am probably going to have to run at a dead speed race, you know, to catch up with you all. You're doing phenomenal things. I have visited well over half of the programs in the state and know them all. You're phenomenal. And to think that you're only 5, almost 6 years old.
7 when we started, 2013.
Yeah,
we started.
But out from underneath the
The
umbrella.
yeah.
Wow. You're phenomenal. And you're doing amazing things. And this morning when we met as staff, I think you're the one who spoke about the journey, aren't you? And the road before us. We're just going to keep up this fast pace. We've got some things that we're going to go over with as staff. I'm always here for you. If you and your supervisor have an issue, let me know. If there's a difficult case we need to staff, I'm your girl. I love brainstorming. So it's great to be here. Thank you. I'm going to go back in there with Angela so that she can brief me some more on your excellency so that I can keep up.
Well, we're really excited.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank
Y'all
you.
give her a wave.
Bye. Enjoy your training.
Thanks, Leanne.
Thank you, Rebel.
You guys are going to love getting to know Leanne. Like I said, she has such a depth of experience and working with Texas CASA programs all over the state. We're really excited to have that expertise and that knowledge here. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Oh, I've got one more I didn't get to admit. So sorry for that. I was letting Leanne talk. Mary, sorry, I'm just now letting you in. Leanne was talking to our group, so I apologize for making you wait. So Jennifer, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you share your screen and get started with your program. And guys, remember to use the chat box, okay? All right.
Thank you, Rebel, y'all. I am not going to put my PowerPoint up on the screen because I want to look at your faces so that I just don't like just talking to myself on the screen. I like to be able to look at you. So that's why I asked Rebel to send it out in advance. And let me say this too. I intentionally put a whole lot of meat in the PowerPoint. So you can take notes if you want to, if that's something that you do, but you don't really have to. There's pretty much everything I'm going to say is in there. So you have that as a resource. And I did that on purpose so that you would have it and you can take it and run with it later. And I can just sit and chat with you. I can, instead of doing, running through screens and all of that sort of stuff. I want to echo what was just spoken to you guys about your importance and the investment that you're making in the lives of children. So I am a marriage and family therapist, a professional counselor, and a registered play therapist. And I've been working here in Abilene at the Ministry of Counseling and Enrichment for a long time. I started there in 1998 and have stayed there and basically grown up there as a therapist and still stay there. But I have worked with so many children who have come from hard places. And I have to tell you what I hear over and over and over again is the importance and the value of your investment as a CASA advocate in their lives. For some of these kids, for many of these kids that I have seen, you are the consistent attachment figure. You're the consistent adult through their entire story. I'm talking about kids who have been in 9 or 10 placements and they've been all over the state and they have had attachment trauma after attachment trauma. And the significant person in their life, the constant, is the CASA advocate. And so I want you, I just hear my applause over you and a massive thank, it really touches me that you guys are investing in the way that you are. And so I want you to know, as from someone who is also in the trenches with you, you are making an amazing, incredible difference. And so thank you for what you do. So dry my eyes and move forward. So today, Rebel asked me to come and talk to you a little bit about different types of trauma-informed therapies for kids. And when I say kids, I mean littles all the way up through adolescence. So any of the kids who might be in your care. And there is no way for us to go into all of the child therapies that are out there. There are hundreds and hundreds of theories and modalities. I just hit on some that I like and that I use when I'm working with kids. And there's not, I'm going to say this, there's not necessarily one that is the best for everyone. It's really important as we're selecting what kind of work we're going to do with what kid, that we have training in it. So whoever you're working with as a therapist, that they have training in the model that they're using. And B, that we're paying attention to the needs of that child or that family and using a modality that really fits their needs. Okay, so I think that Rebecca spoke with you guys last time probably about child-centered play therapy and child-centered play therapy. So on my slides, you've got a couple of things about child-centered play therapy. Basically, child-centered, there's a spectrum of therapies for kids. And if I drew out a line, on one end, it would be child-centered or child-led, and on the, or non-directive, all of those words mean the same thing. And on the other end of the spectrum, it would be therapist-led or directive, okay? So child-centered is all the way over here on this child-led, and basically what that means is we're taking our cues from the child. And the basic premise of child-centered play therapy is that play is the language of children, and there's a significant amount of research that supports why play is important for kids. And when I say play, I mean free play. I don't mean board games or video games. And that the words that they use or the way that they express themselves is through their use of the toys and through the way that they do their play. So that's child-centered play therapy in a tiny, tiny nutshell. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, again, because Rebecca hit it last week. I did include for you on those first two slides, Virginia Axline is the person who really gave us the foundation for child-centered play therapy, and then Gary Landreth built on that, and then Risa Van Fleet has built further on that, and other therapists that are out there. But Axline has 8 principles for relating to kids, and those principles, you really have to hold to them to do child-centered play therapy well. And I think that they're good principles for all of us. Anyone who is interacting with a child, they're good principles for us to keep in mind. And they're principles that include warmth, acceptance, freedom within the context of the play session itself, not freedom all the time, but during that play or therapy session, that we reflect the feelings that we hear, that we respect the child's ability to solve problems on their own, that we're not constantly trying to fix it for them. There's a little mantra that I had to work real hard to keep in my mind, especially early on as a play therapist, and that is never do for a child what a child can do for themselves. And then I added to it, when you do, you take away their opportunity to succeed, you know? And so as a mama bear, I tend to just jump in and do for, you know, and it's like, hold back, let them figure this out, let them do it, and they're going to problem solve and come to it. So in child-centered, the child leads, we go at the child's pace. Because of that, child-centered play therapy tends to be long. It's a long process, but and that's okay. There's not just shorter is not necessarily better in therapy. There are limits that we use if we need to, but those limits are really just about safety, keeping the child safe, the adult safe, and the room and the space safe. And then it puts responsibility back on the child. And think about if we could raise up our kids in a way that they are owning their own responsibility, then they get to be responsible teenagers and responsible adults. So those are really the foundations of child-centered play therapy. And if you wanted to learn more about that, there is a book. It's an old book that Virginia Axline wrote, and I have all of these resources on your PowerPoint slides. They're in there. But this old book is called Dibs in Search of Self. And basically, it's a case study that she wrote about this little boy that she did child-centered play therapy with. and you get to see his transformation. But you get, it's almost like, so I have an old fashioned kind of therapy room where we have an observation room in between the two, and they have the two-way mirror there, so you can watch, and we use that for training, not for being weird, but we use it for training. And so it's almost like you're standing in the window watching a session and just seeing what's happening in the life of this little boy. And so that is a great book if you ever want to learn more about child-centered. So a step away from child-centered, and I'm not going to take you down the spectrum, but another thing that's closely related to child-centered that some of you may have heard about is filial family therapy. So filial family therapy was developed by Bernard and Louise Gurney. And in a nutshell, what filial does is the therapist teaches the parent or the caregiver how to do child-centered play therapy. And then the caregiver starts to do that in the therapist's office and is trained and does it there while the therapist is helping. And then they take it and they do those play sessions at home. Now, you can imagine that that is a really powerful thing, because now we have the family system involved in it. And it's not just a kid comes to the office, meets with me as a therapist, and then goes home to whatever is happening at home. They're coming to the office and the parent is engaging too. And then the work and the relationship that happens in my office is taken home. And so actually there's a really good amount of research that supports filial. There are cases and times where filial is not indicated, and that would be if you have a parent who has been the abuser and they are not yet healed in any way, or you have a parent who is an addict, and so there are some times where there would be danger in that relationship, that would not be the most effective thing. But think about for some of your kiddos who have been maybe out of the home. I've done filial with kids in foster placement, kids in adoptive placement. We've done filial work with, and it's been very good. Or kids who are going back home. They're being reunified with their family. Their parents have done the work that they need to do, and now it's time to reintegrate back into the family system. Filial can be a really important way to do that. The skills, let me tell you real quick, the skills that we focus on teaching parents when we're doing filial, we work on structuring. So how to structure those play sessions, and it's all set up very well. We work on therapeutic limit setting, which is, and this is not, I didn't do this in your slide, but the therapeutic limit setting is ACT choice. So we acknowledge the feeling first when we need to set a limit. Looks like you're really mad right now. We acknowledge the feeling. We start by naming it to tame it. Okay. And then we communicate the limit. It's not okay to hit me. Okay. And we're pausing in between each one of these. And then after we communicate the limit, if the child does not change their behavior, then we target an alternative. You know what? You can hit that pillow. You can hit the bot bag. It's not okay to hit me. And then if all of that doesn't work, then we go to choice. If you choose to continue to hit me, you choose for our play session to be over. So we're acknowledging, communicating, targeting, and putting in choice. So ACT choice. All of that. And then we work on empathic listening skills, reflecting, and how do we listen empathically. And then we help parents or caregivers engage in imaginary play, which is harder than that sounds. There's a lot of parents that are like, oh, I can't do that. And they say, yes, you can, and we can teach you how to do that. So that's filial in a nutshell. The resource I would send you to if you really want to look at filial is to go to Risa Van Fleet's website. She's play-therapy.com, and that's on your slide. And she has a wonderful handbook that I have parents get if we're doing, or caregivers get if we're doing filial, that is step by step. It's super clear and easy, and it walks the caregiver through that whole process step by step. So that's on her website. Another one that's close to filial, And I don't know if you would hear this if any of your kids in Abilene, because I don't think anyone is certified that I know of in parent-child interaction therapy. It's called PCIT. I do know that there are some PCIT certified folks over in Fort Worth. And so depending on where your kiddo is, you might see somebody who's using that PCIT. It's a lot like Filial. It requires a different, it's one that requires a certification in order to be able to use it, not just doing training, but actually being certified. And really where it differs, it's a bit more behavioral in the approach. So focusing a bit more on behavior, although there is some work on attachment and relationship. And they have a mic or a bug in the caregiver's ear, and the therapist is in another room watching the interaction via video and telling the parent, do this, do that, so it's pretty high tech, and you're getting instruction, but the parent is still doing the actual, or the caregiver's doing the actual work with the child in the room instead of the therapist being in that mix. So that's PCIT. And that is, again, I'm giving you just little thumbnails, little snapshots of all of these just for the sake of time. Another one that you might see or hear of is called mindfulness-based play therapy. And so if you know anything about mindfulness has been around for thousands of years as a religious practice. It's been around, some people hear mindfulness and they think Eastern religions, but really there's mindfulness in Christianity, there's mindfulness in Judaism, there's mindfulness really in all religions that are out there. But then mindfulness was taken in and actually used in a hospital setting and was mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. John Kabat-Zinn did that. And then it was taken a step further. I've got it backwards. Mindfulness-based stress reduction, and then cognitive therapy. And so it was taken all the way to where it's used in clinical practice with adults. And Dottie Higgins-Klein took it and brought it into the playroom. And so it incorporates, her work incorporates mindfulness strategies, learning about attunement, learning about calming, thinking about your kids who need help with self-regulation, right? And so it's bringing it into the playroom. She's using a lot of family therapy. She does, one of the things that is kind of a hallmark of her work is doing what's called talk time at the beginning of the session. And I actually like to do that with caregivers and kids. And so instead of just bringing the kid in and going straight off into the therapy room, we bring the kid and the caregiver in at first. And we say, let's talk about this week. And maybe for the first 15 minutes or so, we're doing this engagement where we're building connection. We're teaching how do we communicate about hard things and how do we problem solve together. And then we shift into some strategies in the playroom that really look pretty child-centered, but also incorporate some mindfulness in there. I did put on there, there's a great resource from mindfulnessschools.org, where if you have kids who are needing help with self-regulation, which I would imagine that a lot of you do, then they have some free classes on there for kiddos, which would be a really good way to teach them some of those tools and skills. And I thought I put over here, y'all should see all the piles of stuff I have around me for this. This is another resource that I like. It's a set of cards. It's just called Mindful Games. And it's a set of cards. And if you guys are doing any kind of work where you have you could do these in 1 minute, you could do them, some of them go up to 10 minutes. But I'm thinking about your quick visits with your kids. And if you wanted to teach them some calming and some self-regulation strategies, you could pull out a card and you guys could go through and do different cards that are here. These are on Amazon. They're easy to get. They're super accessible. But that would go well with any kind of play therapy, but definitely with mindfulness-based play therapy. Okay, another model is Dyadic Developmental Psychotherapy, which is this big, long word, that basically is about taking family therapy, attachment theory, and play therapy and blending them together. That's done by the work of Daniel Hughes. And his model is based on the acronym PACE. So it's playful, it's teaching caregivers how to engage kids in a way that's playful, accepting, curious, and empathic. My next slide is on TBRI, and I think some of you have done some work with TBRI. And so you'll remember, you've heard some of playful, accepting, curious, empathic. Karen Purvis drew a lot from Dan Hughes's work. So you'll hear a lot of that in terms of the research that he had already done. The resource that I feel like is the most helpful on his work, I've done training with Dan, and he is a genius, and he is a very, very prolific writer, and I've put several books that are on there that he has done. He can be it can be a little bit hard to read, you know, in terms of looking at the neurobiology that's there. This book is a great book that he's got, The Neurobiology of Attachment Focused Therapy. But I'm going to tell you, it's not an easy read. Okay. So the resource that I would send you to is actually a DVD, and you can watch it if you have Amazon. You can watch it on Amazon. I don't think it's free, but for, you know, whatever their rental cost is. And it's called From Chaos to Healing. And it is an interview, basically this conversation between a social worker and a foster mom, a foster and bio mom. And the social worker has trained with Dan Hughes and it uses that PACE model within his care. And he's done that PACE model with this mom. And she's had all these foster kids come through her home through the years. And so they, in this very real and practical way, they teach all of these different steps: playful, accepting, curious, empathic. And then they also add to that structure, safety, consistency. You know, they add a few other things that are really helpful and important. So I actually oftentimes will have that DVD playing in a separate room. So when I take a kiddo into the office, I'll have parent or caregiver, especially for my kiddos who come from hard places. I'll have them watch that DVD, and I give them a notepad. I'm like, take notes, and we'll go over this in the next session. And then you can tell me, you know, how you're going to apply this, or ask me questions about it. And then we kind of fold and incorporate all of those tenets into the work that they're doing with their kids. So that's Dan Hughes's model. It's also called, you may also hear it, attachment focused family therapy, which is a little bit easier to understand than the original title. So next slide, trust-based relational intervention. Again, I'm not going to camp here because I think that you guys, from what I've talked about with Rebel, I think that you guys have done some TBRI training. If you haven't, then I would send you over to empoweredtoconnect.org. So TBRI is done by the work of Karen Purvis and David Cross, and it is a fantastic model. And you can also learn about it over at TCU's website, their Institute for Child Development. Right now and through August, there are free trainings, and they're designed for educators, TBRI trainings that are designed for educators. But I will tell you, if you listen to those trainings, they would be fabulous for you, anybody who's working with kids. And it's a wonderful resource that it's offered free right now. If you were to go over and buy all of the DVDs, it can get quite expensive to do that training. The book that Karen Purvis wrote is that I would recommend for all of you to read. If I were going to say, and I know I'm giving you lots of resources, but I want you to read 2 books. And those 2 books would be The Connected Child by Karen Purvis. And then the other book I would probably have you read is The Power of Showing Up, hit myself in the face, by Dan Siegel, which is a brand new book. Okay. And I'll show you this one again, probably at the end when I go over some other resources. But those 2 books would be the two that I would have you look at based on the kiddos that you guys are working with. I think that it's very, very helpful to look at those two. So, so I'm not going to go, like I said, I'm not going to go further into TBRI just because I think that you have some resources in that. We do have some TBRI certified organizations and trainers here in town. MCH, Methodist Children's has that. New Horizons is in the process. I don't know if they're fully certified yet, but I know that they've been in the process of getting trained and certified. And I can't actually teach you that model because I'm not certified in it. And you offer it. That's right. Thank you, Rebel. So you guys have that. You're good to go. Okay. The next slide that I have there for you is called Trauma Focused CBT, TFCBT. And TFCBT, let me say this, that there are agencies in town who also highly use and specialize in TFCBT. If you have a kid who goes over to Crime Victims Counseling Center, RVCC, they are most likely going to be doing TFCBT. That's a model that is an evidence-based model. That they're most likely going to be doing TFCBT with their kids. Now, when outside folks have done research on TFCBT, what they have found is that TFCBT is very, very effective for single incident traumas. It is not as effective for developmental trauma. So developmental trauma is when you have a kiddo who has had trauma after trauma after trauma after trauma after trauma. TFCBT is not quite as effective for that developmental trauma. And a lot of the kiddos that you guys are going to have, not all of them, but a lot of them have had that developmental trauma, you know? So the hallmarks of TFCBT, it's a great model. You have to be certified. You have to be trained in it, and they do offer a training that's pretty accessible for most therapists to be able to do. I think it's about a 30-hour training, and then to do certification, you have to do a bit more. You have to be trained in it to use it, and you have to use the model with fidelity, meaning you go step by step by step according to the model. So they start with building coping skills, which is a very good thing. And then they work on what's called a trauma timeline. So this happened, here's our life, and this happens, this happens, this happens. And then through the process of that trauma timeline, they're doing gradual exposure to the trauma, not taking the kid back into, so it's a symbolic exposure to the trauma. And it's based on cognitive behavioral therapy, which very much is about exposure to whatever it is that you're afraid of, you know? So for some kids, TFCBT can be very hard. It can be a hard thing for them to be exposed to that trauma over and over again. But if it's done well, then they titrate that, meaning they do it just a little bit at a time, and they're making sure that that child is staying within what we call the window of tolerance, which I'm going to talk about it in a second with the Emdr. And so, and they also have built coping skills, a lot of coping skills at the beginning. TFCBT also works with the caregiver to help the caregiver know everything that they're doing with the child, so that caregiver can help support outside of the session, which is a very good thing. So next, let's talk a little bit about EMDR. This is what Rebel originally contacted me for and said, hey, tell us a little bit about EMDR. And so it's hard to talk about EMDR in a nutshell, but for the sake of time, because I want to leave plenty of time for you to be able to ask questions and for us to converse. So EMDR stands for eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. And if I were going to take you back in history, the therapist who developed EMDR is Francine Shapiro. She had been through some sort of trauma herself. She was trained as a cognitive behavioral therapist. She's a psychologist, and she was processing the trauma while she was on a walk. And on that walk, she recognized that as she was doing what we call bilateral stimulation, using both sides of my body in a rhythmic way, and she was thinking about the trauma that had happened to her while she was kind of engaged in that thought process, her eyes kind of naturally started moving back and forth, you know, not crazy, not bouncing back and forth, but just kind of moving back and forth as she's doing this bilateral stimulation. And they started doing more and more and more research on it. And it has been extensively researched now. And they have found that really the tenets of the whole therapy are that really you've got bilateral stimulation. So sometimes we are moving eyes, and so it's follow my fingers across the screen. And sometimes we are doing other, of course, kids sometimes have a hard time with that. So we're just doing anything that is bilateral. Sometimes they're going to have like little buzzers that buzz like your cell phone, and that each one of your hands buzz, 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 buzz. Sometimes they're going to just tap gently on the kiddo, depending on what they can take. Sometimes they're going to have the kid tap themselves. They're going to use what we call a butterfly hug, and they may tap themselves. And it's done. They've done all the research to find certain paces are what we need to do when we're reprocessing, and then we slow it down and do another pace when we're installing the positive belief. Okay, so the metaphor that I would share, and this isn't from Shapiro's work, but the metaphor that I would share, a way that I had conceptualized our belief system, and specifically trauma, before I got to EMDR training. So I've been through the training now, and I'm almost done with certification. Training requires, it's a 6-day training with a 10-hour practicum in between where you have to get consultation. And then certification is 20 more hours of consultation and 50 more hours of practicum at least on top of that. So it takes a lot to get trained and certified in EMDR. But before I got there, this metaphor that I noticed, and it really fit for a lot of folks, is that if you closed your eyes and you imagined that the walls of your mind had messages that were written on the walls from different life experiences, whatever anything that was significant, right? That those experiences would write messages, and they became beliefs where you would live your life by. So maybe that belief is, if we think about a trauma, maybe that belief is it's all my fault. Or maybe that belief is I'm unlovable. Or maybe that belief is shame, you know? And experience after experience after experience continue to ingrain that message on the wall of your mind. And then by the time they get to therapy is this process, first of all, of understanding and figuring out what the messages are. Where did they come from? And do we still agree with those messages? Or is that a message that you know that that's no longer helpful? That made sense at one point in your life, but that does not fit anymore, right? And so then it's this long process sometimes of working those messages off the wall. And to continue the metaphor, sometimes it's like in chalk. So it's an easy swipe, you know, no, I don't agree with that. Swipe, I'm done with that. And I replace it with truth, you know? Sometimes it's going to be something that is going to be like a Sharpie on the wall. I don't know if you've ever had a kid who's written with a Sharpie on the wall. It's hard to get off, you know? Sometimes it's like wallpaper, and little pieces come off, little piece at a time, and then it's peeled off, right? The texture of the wall, you know? And sometimes the picture that I like the most, and I need to go up there and take a picture. I don't know if any of you have been to the Old Jail Art Center out in Albany. In the old jail cell, you can see someone etched his name in the stone. And I don't remember how many days he was there. He was there for a long time. And he wrote over that message over and over and over again. And he probably used his fingertip, you know, over and over again. And it's about this thick in that wall. And sometimes trauma leaves us with a message in our heart, in our lives, that is this thick. Now, coming back to EMDR, EMDR is this process where we don't have to talk about it. We don't have to use words. There is not homework in between, except for recognizing what is going on, if you have any kind of extra thoughts that come up. And then so it really helps in that way, in that we don't have to get into all of the story, but we recognize, we find the targets or those beliefs, those messages that are on the wall. We identify what they are, and we talk about what is it that you want to believe instead. And we go through this process where we're using the bilateral stimulation, so both sides of the body. And then another tenet of EMDR is what's called dual awareness, meaning I can think about what happened in the past while I'm present here in your office. And we have to be able to stay and think about it in the past and be present, because what traumatic memories do is if they get stuck in there, then we experience them in the present like they're happening right now. So that belief of it's all my fault gets lodged into my limbic system, where I've got fight, flight, or freeze, and my limbic system is on overdrive, and I'm still experiencing that like it's happening right now, but it's something that happened 15 years ago, right? And so through that process of the bilateral stimulation, and I'm remembering the past, but I'm staying present, then the mind begins to take this old message that at one time was helpful, at one time it made sense, and you go through, and basically it's kind of like riding on a train, and you see the memories go past. And I know it sounds kind of crazy, but it works. So you see the memories go past, and the therapist simply checks in. What's happening now? And then the client will say, and I'm noticing this. Okay, notice that. And then the train keeps going. And the mind has a way with this reprocessing that it takes it from a belief like it's all my fault, and we end the train stops with, that wasn't my fault. That's something that happened to me, but that's not my fault at all. You know, and you can imagine that shift changes not only how they see themselves, but how they see the world and how they do relationships. And it is a fascinating, fabulous thing. Now, sometimes EMDR works in 2 to 3 sessions. So you have a history taking session, and I've got more information in here, but you've got like a history taking session, and you figure out what those targets are that you want to go after, those beliefs that you want to go after. And then you always, 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 in good EMDR therapy, you always spend a lot of time preparing a client. So we want to make sure that the client has the resources that they need. We call it resourcing. They have to have the resources that they need in order to be able to take that train ride without being completely overwhelmed, you know? And so we teach them about the window of tolerance, which basically is how much distress can you tolerate without becoming overwhelmed. And overwhelmed is fight, right? And flight, right? Or underwhelmed, where you freeze, or you dissociate, or you faint over here. And sometimes with people who have experienced trauma after trauma after trauma, their window is really tiny. And so with EMDR work, you may have to spend a lot of time in it, using all kinds of tools and resources from different therapies to help expand that window, because we want, while we're going on that train ride and reprocessing the memories, we want them to be able to stay in this window. Because, and then we want them, after they leave my office, I want them to still be able to stay in a window that they can tolerate in terms of their own self-regulation. So that is a tiny nutshell explanation of EMDR. If you want to know more about it, I would send you to EMDR. Let me see if I have, yes, EMDR.com, and look at what is EMDR, and then Emdria, EMDRIA.org. those are the two places where I would send you to really to understand. Those are like the foundations for EMDR. Ana Gomez, who I had the great joy of doing consultation with last year, has taken the whole model and adapted it for kids and teenagers. And you can see her work at anagomez.org. And so basically you take all of these things that Francine Shapiro developed in terms of how do we use it with adults, and we do it in a playful application with kids. Now, the really cool thing about doing any kind of therapy with kids is that their walls, typically, they're not etched. There's not been enough time and life experience for those beliefs to be etched in super deep, you know? And so it's a little bit easier to shift those messages. And we tend to see kids, especially with EMDR, they tend to be faster than adults do in that work. And it may just take a few sessions and they are on their way. So Ana has done amazing adaptations for kids, and anyone who's doing with the EMDR with kids needs to not only be trained in EMDR, but then further trained through consultation with someone who can teach them how to do that application with kiddos. In town, there are probably 10 of us, maybe 12 of us who are trained, and a few, probably half, are certified. And then there are folks I know over in Brownwood who are trained, you know, in some of the other communities who are trained. It's really become the research, the efficacy is at or above 90% effective, which is amazing for efficacy. And so I think it's going to be one of those trainings eventually that's incorporated into all mental health graduate programs. We're not there yet, but a lot of them do. But it's that effective. I think we will see that probably in the next 10 or 20 years. So the last one that I wanted to tell you about is not really a play therapy theory, but it's the theory of interpersonal neurobiology. That's a mouthful, but basically that is, how does my biology, my brain, interact with the person that is, there's a question that I'm sorry, I got distracted by the question. I'm going to get back to that in a second. But how is my brain and my biology impacted by your brain and your biology? And how do they work together? Now, the person who established that is Dan Siegel. If you have read The Whole Brain Child, which is a great, easy read, it is like the most basic, easy parenting read that I can have everybody do, you know? And it is all about, how do I stay within that zone of regulation, and how do I connect with my child? And so it's very rooted in attachment theory. And really what they're looking for is integration. So the upstairs part of the brain and the downstairs part of the brain are communicating with each other, you know? Because of time, I'm not going to do Dan's hand-brain model, but you can look him up. If you look at drdansiegel.com, you can look him up and you can watch him do that hand-brain model. I use that with kids all the time, where basically I'm explaining, this is what happens in the downstairs part of your brain. This is your limbic system and your amygdala. You have fight, flight, freeze, or faint. And when those stressors come in, it looks like I'm doing it anyway. I've got to. So the stressors come in, the amygdala picks up on the stressors. They're these little almond-shaped sensors that are there. It picks up on the stressors that are happening in your environment. And it might be picking up on a memory that's lodged down in here, or a message that's stuck down in there. And that kind of speaks back to EMDR, which fits really well with interpersonal neurobiology. And it sends the signal to your limbic system, to your sensor, to your fight, flight, freeze system right here in the fraction of a second. Like, before you have time to think about what is that, and your body responds. But your body only has 4 choices: fight, flight, so run away, freeze, like a possum, and it gets down into the brainstem and you can faint. Like, think about, if I see blood, then I'm going to pass out. You know, or I'm going to get hot and sweaty like I'm about to pass out. That's the faint, okay? Now, the goal is to recognize when your lid is flipped, and when you're in that limbic system, and kids who have been under trauma all the time, they basically live down here all the time, which is why we see this behavioral dysregulation in them, and we see them quickly move into fight, flight, freeze. And then we want to begin the process of integrating this upstairs part of your brain, up here, prefrontal cortex, where you're able to think, tell the story of what happened, use your words to say what you think and feel. Karen Purvis says, use your good word. First, you use your words. I was on the phone with her one day and she said, Jennifer, first, we just need him to use his words, and then we'll get to his good words. So his words can be whatever they are, but if he's using his words, that counts. And I was like, okay, you're right, Dr. Purvis. Yes. Then we use our good words, you know, and then we have this neural integration. And that's what interpersonal neurobiology is about in a nutshell. So that you can look at the whole brain child. You can look at parenting from the inside out. Dan Siegel and Tina Bryson have written several books together that are really good. And then this one, The Power of Showing Up, is about attachment. And it's about how does my attachment style as an adult impact your attachment style as a kid, you know? And so that's a really cool thing. And I'm recommending this to you guys because I was thinking about how you show up for the kids, you know, and this then gives strategies for how they do that. So there's a last slide that has some other recommendations that are there. If you wanted to know more about interpersonal neurobiology, really the easiest read is not by Dan himself, but it's by Teresa Kessley, and it's called The Interpersonal Neurobiology of Play. It's a pretty new book, and it's a really easy, good read for parents. So, okay, let's take questions. That was like a fast ride. I hope I didn't overwhelm you with too much information. Like I said, you've got it all in that PowerPoint and you can look back at it. But let's go and look at your questions. I'm going to see if I can see in the chat. So it says, we normally offer TBRI training with MCH and Megan Harbin. Yes. And you'll have the videos and you'll have, yes, wonderful. I'm glad that you guys are doing that. And I would highly recommend that all of your advocates take part in that training. Do most of the EMDR therapists in Abilene take Superior Health Medicaid? I don't know the answer to that. I know that most of the therapists at Ministry of Counseling, and I'm not plugging for Ministry of Counseling. We are not in need of more clients. We are, you know, so this is not a plug, but that's the context that I know. I know that all of our therapists who are EMDR trained are also Medicaid providers. Rosie Hollingsworth is EMDR trained. I think that she takes Medicaid and CHIP. And Earhart is EMDR trained. She does not take insurance. And I do not believe that she takes, I would say ask her, but I don't think that Ann takes the Medicaid. And then there are others. There's a couple over at Freedom.
Yes.
And I am not sure.
I think they do take it.
I think that the counselors at Freedom do. Yeah, Freedom Counseling. I think that they do. And I can't remember if anyone at Turning Point is trained at this point. Vicki Copeland was over there, and Vicki did take the Medicaid, Superior Medicaid, but I don't think she's doing the therapy anymore. I think she's actually working in a different role. So age for EMDR, I would say that if the younger you get, the more it's going to have to be adapted. And so it's really going to look different if you're doing EMDR with a little bitty, like a preschooler, is going to look very different. That's going to be setting up the stories and the memories that we're going through in a very playful way, and definitely not trying to ride that train where they're just doing that processing. It's going to be, I understand, like really setting a trauma narrative and then playfully working through it while you're doing that bilateral stimulation. And a lot of times with itty bitties, it's going to look like they have those little buzzers. They have them in their hands, or sometimes they'll put them under their knees where they're just sitting in the chair and they can feel it. Or we have somebody, maybe it's a caregiver or the therapist standing behind them doing the tapping on their shoulders, you know. But I have had some school age kids who have done a remarkable job using EMDR, and they have been able to do it without necessarily incorporating the play into it. So especially single incident traumas, they've done really well with that. How is it decided what therapy is needed? It's often hard to find the right therapist for a child. Yeah. We really, it's like I said at the beginning, it's going to be what models is that therapist trained in, and play therapy, unfortunately, is not included in all graduate programs. So a lot of times people will graduate from a graduate program and then they're going to have to do all of their training postgraduate in order to be able to get the training. So what models have they been trained in? And we need to only use models that we're well trained in. And then what models fit that child, you know? And really, I would say that that choice usually needs to be up to the therapist. It could be that a parent is saying, you know, I've read about these therapies, and can inform or a caregiver could inform the therapist, this is something that we've done before and it didn't work, or this is something that we've done before and it did work. That's one of those first questions that I ask on intake. What have you done in the past? What have you tried? What worked? What hasn't? And then I just make my decision based on what has worked or not. I also sometimes am curious about the work, if the parents or caregivers have training in anything or have done some of their own work and they've used a particular model, and it's been effective for them. Sometimes I'll try to use parts, if not all of that model, because it's something that those caregivers already have a working knowledge of, you know. And so that's a long answer to say it depends, you know. Since we're in the time of COVID, what types of counseling are more conducive to being conducted virtually? That is a good question. We do know that we can do EMDR virtually. It does have to be adapted some, and I think it's been challenging to do those playful adaptions with kids. It's been a little bit more challenging to do that than it has been to do EMDR with adults. So that EMDR can be adapted for that. I'm trying to think through, definitely child-centered, definitely Filial. I've done a lot of Filial work since March with caregivers and kiddos. We've done mindfulness work. So really all of these things could be used. What I haven't done from my home, I'm doing virtual therapy right now. And what I haven't been able to do is incorporate sand tray. I have done some expressive arts, but I can't do as much. I'm limited to whatever that kiddo has at home, you know? And so I haven't been able to incorporate some of those expressive therapies that I definitely would be using, or interventions that I definitely would be using in the office. But even in the office now, some of those are limited because we have to clean everything that everybody touches in between. And so you can imagine if we're going, 8 hours a day back to back, and you're taking a kid and you can't give them access to the full playroom because you don't have time to go and Lysol every single thing in that playroom in between. And that's what CDC is requiring us to do at this point, basically, is clean everything that's touched. So even in the office, we're having to do some adaptation, which really is maybe go in, get the things that you need from the playroom, bring them into an adult type office, and then just have a handful of things that you have to sanitize in between. So I am ready. I know everybody's ready for an end to COVID. I am so ready to be back in the office and to be able to get our hands, as a play therapist, like to get our hands back into everything, So all the art stuff, all the clay, all the sand, I'm ready to get back into all of it. And right now we just can't because there of, you know, all restrictions and germs and all of that. So did I hit all of the questions? Does anybody have another question? You're welcome to take yourself off of mute and jump in there if you have a question. We're right at an hour.
While they're thinking about that, really quick, I want to share the reason that you know, as y'all know, most of y'all have been through training with me, and I really focus on getting our children the right kind of help while we have them. We have 1 year, and let's get them as much help and the right help as possible. But a lot of our kids are not responding to the more non-directive type of therapy that Jennifer mentioned. And on my current case, this is her second time in care. It's JMC with the department, which means mom has joint managing conservatorship. The child's extremely violent to the point where mom's afraid to have her in the home because of the abuse that she endured for 5 years while living with another family member. And so she plateaued. She's not responding to traditional therapy. No one's being that helpful with the facility that she was at. So I had to ask the judge to order that we could look at EMDR or a different type of psychotherapy. And so we got her in EMDR. I talked to Jennifer, I think right around the time that she started it. And Jennifer said, if she meets the criteria, and, you know, talking in general, that if a child meets the criteria or a person that fits that modality, then it has that 90 to 95% success rate. I was blown away by that because this is her second time back in care and nothing has worked. And I am determined that this will be her last time in care, period. This is it. And so we fought really hard to get this therapy. 2 sessions, she is a different child. I mean, and she used the train example. She said, I can be on this train, I can see my trauma, and I can go right on past it, and it doesn't throw me over. She would go into a rage. She lived in that constant fight or flight. And so she couldn't process anything that was happening. And they did what you talked about, where they tapped on her knees. And it just was, it was a huge breakthrough. And we may not be finished yet. We may not be at the end. That train may not come to that complete stop yet for her. But the progress, even the placement, I almost call them by name, the place where she is blown away to the point that one of those therapists is now getting EMDR certified. And so it's kind of sad it took them to that extreme, but this is how powerful this therapy is. And that's why I want you guys to know about all of the different types of modalities, and that we have resources that, you know, they may not have room over at Ministry of Counseling right now. I know for a fact they have a waiting list. But there are so many therapists here in town that are somewhere else. But Jennifer's a great resource that she can advise us and she can give us some direction. So please don't give up on your kids. If they've hit that plateau, if they're not making the progress that they need, if it's just not working, then let's look at something different. That's what you're there for, is to fight for them to get what they need while they're in care so they go home better, and that they don't live a life in bondage to that trauma. So you guys have other questions? Byron put one up there, Jennifer.
There was a question about, let me see if I can read it exactly how you wrote it again. Oh, I lost the chat.
Oops.
More. You said.
You found it? Okay.
As advocates, what are the risks involved with some of us using some of these techniques? Are some techniques used best in a clinical setting? Yeah. So you guys are not going to go home and try to do EMDR.
No.
You're not certified in it. You're not trained in it. I wouldn't have done it even as a therapist who had been in practice for 15, 18 years by the time I went to the training, you know? So you're not going to go home and do that. Now, what you could do from the EMDR is we could find out in that preparation phase, what resources has that kid identified, has that child or adolescent identified, and what are their calming techniques and their calming tools. And now I, as an advocate, I can come in and say, let's talk about the resources and the calming tools and the strategies that you know, and let me help. Can you teach them to me? That would be the best way to get them to do it, is can you teach me about your resources or about your coping, your tools or your strategies? If I were to look through all of the things that I gave you, definitely those principles that are in Filial family therapy, you can learn those and you can use those with the kids that you have, in terms of learning the empathic listening and the therapeutic limit setting. You can absolutely learn how to do those things and use those tools. You can use mindfulness techniques with your kids, that mindfulness-based play therapy. You can definitely do those. That PACE model that I talked about, Dan Hughes's model, and then all of those interventions from TBRI, you can use all of that with the kids that you're working with. And all of those are great. So TBRI, you've got felt safety, you've got those connecting principles, the correcting principles. You learn all of those. And really, that's less about, it is a therapeutic intervention, but it's more about how are we relating to these kids in a way that understands where they are and what's happening with their brains, and how myself and what's happening with me, how my regulation or not impacts theirs, right? And I'm keeping them in that zone of connection and regulation, and so definitely the TBRI things you can use with them. The trauma focused CBT, you would really be pulling from the resources again, so
And
hopefully
Jennifer,
that answered.
I had a question text to me. Is EMDR effective with suppressed memories?
Yes. Now here's where it comes out. So basically, the beginning of treatment, we're focused on what are the current symptoms, and we see the symptoms are basically a manifestation of that old message that's back there. Sometimes you're going to remember the memory that set that message on the wall to begin with. Sometimes that may be pre-verbal, and pre-verbal memories, tend to be memories that we don't have a story for, right? Because you didn't have language at that point. But they may be a sense, it may be a feeling. And part of EMDR, after you go through the cognitive process or reprocessing, then you turn and you do a body scan. And so you're scanning your body for any discomfort that's in the body, and we do reprocessing there. Bessel van der Kolk is really one of the leading experts in trauma, and he wrote a book about 10 years ago called The Body Keeps the Score.
Yeah.
It's an excellent read. It's a hard read. As a clinician, it's one that I have worked through 4 times. I've read it 4 times from cover to cover and tried to absorb it. And he talks about how our bodies hold on to that trauma, so sometimes the suppressed memory is held in the body. EMDR can definitely get to that. What we try to target when we're going after those old memories or those messages on the wall, we try to target the first time you remember it. And we use a technique called float back, where we're just imagining going back in time and to the first time you can remember that message, And so we try to get to the first. And the reason that we do the first one first is sometimes if we get to that original, and sometimes we can, and sometimes it happened earlier than what we can actually remember. But if we can get to the first one, then all the other times that message was reinforced, they don't matter anymore, right? Like they lose their power because you've gotten rid of that first original situation that made you believe that in the first place, right? So we go to the first, we go to the worst, whatever the worst time is that you can remember having that thought or that feeling, and then we go to the most recent. But we find that by going to that first one, that it tends to clear out. And sometimes we can't get back to that first one, but as we start that processing, then we find that there actually is one that's maybe behind or before that. And so that's where sometimes EMDR can go longer than just a few sessions when you have what's called these feeder memories that are coming in. And it's like, oh, I didn't really remember that, but it's impacting this one, you know? And so we've got to get back to, we do what we can with this, and then we got to get back to that one, you know? So another piece sometimes is depending on a person's response, and I know this is probably a bigger answer than you want, but depending on their response to the trauma, if they go not fight or flight, but they go freeze or faint, if they become dissociative, sometimes you lose the language, like literally the part of your brain that has language processing goes offline. There's a really cool visual in The Body Keeps the Score of an fMRI of a husband and wife who experienced the same auto accident. He maintained language, and his trauma processing, he was able to access the memory using his words and process it. Hers went complete, that language part of her brain went completely offline during the trauma. She dissociated, and so she had no words to describe that memory later on, because it was stored in a place that didn't have any language access, you know? So anyway, that's a long explanation to say, yeah, we can get to those. We can. Any other questions?
Yes. Put them in the chat box. You can email them to me. If you think of something later today, I'll be happy to share those with Jennifer, and we'll get you the answers that you need. You're going to get an hour and a quarter credit today, 1.25. If you have questions as I'm doing these last couple of things, put them in the chat box. Jennifer, I need you to pick out a number between 1 and 18 for me.
Let's do 13.
D. Moore, Miss Dolores. Yay, there she is. Okay, you have your choice because you're first. Our pen set or our mug? Mug, pencil. The pen set. Okay, so I'm putting you down for the pens. All right, if you'll pick another number for me.
Let's go for 9.
Oh, Christy McNall. Christy,
yay!
You get a mug. I see she's sitting at her pool. That's not fair.
I love it.
I recognize that view. Okay, and then we have a little Casa pen that can go on when you're going to court, or you can just wear it around. So if you'll pick one more number for me.
3.
Mary Caton. Mary, yay, you got a Casa pen. And Jennifer, normally to our speakers, we have a mug for you, but since we're virtually, I'll save it. And so sometime when we're going to get together, I have one of our Casa mugs for you.
Thank you. It has been a joy to talk with you guys. Thank you for listening. And I hope I didn't nerd out too much. I love talking about play therapy. So hopefully I made it practical and something that you can use. So.
It was very informative. We appreciate you. Yeah, they're giving you applause, but it was very informative, Jennifer. And these are really the knowledge base that we need them to have to be able to better advocate for our kids. You know, to know that we don't just have to go by the first thing that's on that list. We can look outside the norm. Yes,
wonderful. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys. We appreciate you, Jennifer. Blessings to you, and thank you again. We appreciate
You're welcome. You're welcome.
And guys, I'll send out the link to this in case you missed something, or if you want more, if you want to follow up on it. Bye.